Thank you for watching. Subscribe on Deceived Husbands for more stories. I was checking my mail at the end of the driveway when a blue Audi cruised by and pulled into my neighbor's garage. As the car drove up, the garage door opened to let it in, then closed. This was odd since I knew Jake was out of town. Why would someone be entering their garage? There could be countless innocent reasons, a cousin or maybe Alice's brother, who knows? And it wasn't my business. I quickly forgot about it when I saw a letter from my sister in New York. Clara always writes great letters full of family news and articles from her many subscriptions. The next morning, as I was pulling out of my driveway to go to work, an Audi sped past me so fast I barely had time to brake to avoid hitting it. I might have ignored this if my wife Susan and I hadn't stopped by the Jacobs house while walking our dog on Saturday evening. The blue Audi was parked on the street, and Jake was standing on the porch talking to the guy I had seen earlier that week driving the car. Jake and the guy came up to us as we were walking along the sidewalk. "Hey, Tom, Susan," Jake said. We paused until the two men approached. "Tom, meet my best friend Mark Stevens. Mark, this is our neighbor, Tom." I shook Mark's hand and introduced Susan. "This is my wife, Susan." I wasn't surprised when Mark let go of my hand and took Susan's hand, looking at it like it was dessert. When you marry a woman as beautiful as Susan, you get used to men drooling over her. But this guy had an expression on his face that I couldn't read, perhaps a smirk, as if he knew something I didn't. Now that I found out that Mark was Jake's best friend and not some relative, my head started to buzz. Why did this guy spend the night when Jake was out of town? Was there something between Mark and Jake's wife, Alice? Personally, I can't imagine anything worse than having a best friend sleep with his friend's wife, but perhaps there's an innocent explanation. For example, the guy came to town on business and needed somewhere to stay. So I asked Mark, "Where do you live?" "Across the bridge in Riverside," Mark replied. Thus, I closed the topic. Mark is not related and doesn't live so far away that he would need a room for the night while traveling. It remains, Mark was still looking at Susan like he was ready to pounce on her, so I said we needed to finish walking the dog and said goodbye to Jake and Mark. This left me with a dilemma. Should I say something to Jake? Part of me wanted to stay out of it, but part of me realized that Jake had been my friend since Susan and I moved into the area 8 months ago, and if I were him, I'd want to know if my wife was sleeping with someone on the side. By that Monday, I had already decided. While Jake was mowing the lawn, I came over to chat. After the pleasantries, I simply said, "Jake, last Tuesday night while you were out of town, your best friend Mark spent the night at your house." Jake's reaction could have knocked me off my feet. He even chuckled as he answered, "Tom, of course, I bet he gave Alice all the pleasure of her life." My mouth was open. I had no words in response to Jake's statement. Jake continued to laugh as he explained, "Tom, I thought you knew Alice and I have an open relationship." It took me a few seconds to realize this. "So, you do this with other people?" "Even more, we exchange partners. Haven't you ever noticed that cars come here once every few weeks when it's our turn to host?" Jake looked like he was having fun with my discomfort. "Yes, Tom, we host 6 or more couples plus singles like Mark. We all switch partners." I still hadn't come up with a coherent response to Jake's news when he asked the inevitable question. "Would you and Susan like to join us? We are always looking for newcomers. Alice and I will be considered aces if we attract you two." This question brought me out of my stupor. "No, Jake, there's no way we would participate in something like that." As I turned to leave, I heard Jake say after me, "It's a pity." The fact is, this is not the first time recently that the question of such intimate entertainment has been raised. 4 or 5 months ago, Susan and I were recovering from a particularly intense evening when she asked me, "Tom, what fantasies do you have?" I pondered the question as my breathing slowly returned to normal. "I would like to make love to you on the beach." Apparently, I didn't give Susan the answer she was looking for, so she asked again, "Anything else?" I was almost afraid to bring this up, but I decided to give it a chance. Do you promise that you won't think I'm a pervert if I tell you? Susan propped herself up on one elbow, turning to face me as if reassuring me that I must continue. I promise, Tom. What is it? Even just thinking about it made me excited. Remember, you promised. I want you to dress really nicely, high heels, a little black dress that barely covers your fifth place, and your perfect chest showing tons of cleavage. I want you to go to the hotel bar without me. As I spoke, Susan looked at me with even more enthusiasm. I could see that she was on edge. I want you to sit at the bar on a high stool with your long legs hanging out of that little black dress. Then I would walk into the bar and pretend I didn't know you. I would buy you a drink. We would chat until you finished your drink. Then I would take you out of the bar and all the men in the bar would watch us leave. I would take you to the room I booked, and we would have an intimate time for hours. What if one of the men at the bar tried to buy me a drink or pick me up? You would, of course, ignore them. Wouldn't you love to watch me flirt with some guy at the bar before you pick me up? Wouldn't that make you horny? No. In my kinky fantasies, you can dress like an available girl in public, but that's too kinky. What about exchanging couples during intimate? Have you ever thought about having a night with another couple or multiple couples? Susan's question shocked me. Susan, I have no desire to do this with any other woman, and I certainly have no desire to watch any other man do this with you. And what is this, your fantasy? Susan was smart enough to give me the correct answer. No, Tom, I just asked because many couples have this fantasy. I'm just wondering if one of yours is like that. Susan ended the conversation by bending over and making me feel good. After that, I immediately fell asleep. The conversation about fantasies was forgotten until that Monday afternoon when I was telling Susan about the Jacobs parties. I remembered Susan's question after leaving Jake that afternoon. I returned to our house. Susan was sunbathing outside in a skimpy bikini. I took a beer from the refrigerator and sat next to her on the terrace. Susan, do you know that the Jacobs throw intimate parties with other couples? Susan's answer was telling. Every time she talks to someone, Susan pulls her sunglasses up onto the top of her head so the other person can see her green eyes. Years ago, Susan's father told me that he taught his children to take off their sunglasses when they were talking to someone. He told me this because he wanted me to follow the same advice. He got tired of talking to me when I shaded my eyes. He said it made him not trust me. So when Susan turned to me still wearing her sunglasses while answering my question, it made me suspicious. No, Tom, what? Where did you get this idea from? Jake, he said exactly that. I told him that Mark had spent Tuesday night at his house while he was away on a business trip. He shrugged, saying that he and Alice have an open relationship, that they exchanged partners and have intimate parties. Well, I don't understand why it's any of our business. I can't believe you ratted Alice out to Jake. Why did you do that? Susan, if you were going behind my back, I would want a real friend to tell me about it. It's still a scam. I thought all boys were taught not to be talkers when they grew up. It all depends on the seriousness of the offense. Small things are not talked about. But if it's important, Susan interrupted me. What's wrong with Alice sleeping with someone else? Who is she hurting? Before I had time to think about it, I was already answering Susan. Susan, you speak as if adultery is something insignificant. For many marriages, it is a breach. Most spouses have difficulty coping with the infidelity of their husbands or wives. I was stunned by Susan's answer. Well, that's just stupid. It's just a night. I was still stunned and silent when Susan diffused the entire conversation. Tom, whatever the Jacobs do is their business, not ours. As long as we love and trust each other and remain true to our vows, we should not quarrel with each other. Come here and kiss me. You haven't kissed me for several hours. I kissed Susan, but something in our conversation did not give me peace. What would I have thought if I hadn't been distracted by Susan's tight body in a blue bikini? Over the next few weeks, I watched Susan more closely. I must admit that almost everything in our daily life was completely normal. Our nightlife didn't suffer. We still had intimate moments at least 3 to 4 times a week, and weekend sessions continued to blow my mind, sometimes lasting for hours. There were no external signals that would make me suspicious. with two exceptions. First, one day when I picked up Susan's smartphone to look up a phone number in her contacts, the phone was locked. This was something new. Susan had never blocked her phone before. She said it was too inconvenient. Secondly, I noticed that Susan was clearing the history on her computer again. Susan had never done this in the past. Both a locked phone and a cleared history are small things, but as someone once said, from small things come big things. None of these circumstances were difficult to resolve. With some concern that I was invading Susan's privacy, I was able to install a program on her computer that recorded activity in the background. Susan could erase her history, but the computer would still save it in a file that I could view. It was not difficult to crack her phone password. I very casually handed Susan her phone and asked for her brother's phone number. She didn't even mention that the phone was locked and didn't realize that her back was to the mirror while unlocking it. I held my phone in my hand, recording a video of the image in the mirror while I waited for her to give me Matt's number. The web pages Susan visited over the next couple of weeks were interesting. She seemed to enjoy reading erotic stories on the internet. What bothered me most was that these stories were mostly about intimate moments with multiple partners. Every chance I got, I read the messages on Susan's phone, and for weeks there was nothing out of the ordinary. No calls to anyone I might consider a potential lover. Nothing. Until I told Susan I needed to be out of town on business for a week and a half. My job as a translator usually required me to travel out of town every 2 months or so. Employees alternated business trips so that no one was constantly stuck on them. 2 days after I told her the news, during which time Susan was acting very sad that I would be gone for so long, I read a message on Susan's phone from Alice. We agreed on Saturday despite the late notice. 5 couples confirmed because you will be here again. Do you know how happy Jake and Mark are? See you. I was angry almost to the point where I couldn't think straight. My cheating wife, pretending to be sad, was looking forward to my absence so she could sleep with a bunch of people. After rereading the SMS, I almost fainted. The word again was decisive, but it was time to come to terms with it and start planning. I'll have plenty of time later to mourn the end of my marriage. The next morning I found and made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. Then I asked my boss to let me skip this task. I made some lame excuse for why I couldn't go and promised that I would compensate for my replacement later. He hemmed and hawed, making a mountain out of a molehill. But this was nonsense because in the last year I have probably backed up my colleagues at least twice. After some grumbling, he agreed that I could take the next 10 days off. On Thursday morning, I kissed Susan goodbye and checked into a nearby hotel instead of going to the airport. I used the company credit card to rent a car, which was a clear violation of company policy. But by this time, I didn't care anymore and bought everything I thought I'd need. I met with a divorce lawyer on Friday to understand what my options were and what would happen if I divorced Susan. It wasn't all rosy. We would basically split all of our assets in half, and I would probably end up paying her alimony for 5 years. Susan had a part-time job that paid very little but gave her a discount on all the clothes she bought. Susan loved to dress beautifully. This was never a big problem. The house was always tidy. Dinner was on the table most evenings, and I made good money. Now her meager salary meant that I would have to supplement her income until she could retrain for her career. Wait, are you saying that she can ruin our entire marriage and I still have to pay her? The lawyer shrugged. Yes, since the laws changed, this is how everything happens. If you are divorcing your spouse, adultery does not matter now. Now I understand how naive I was when it came to my wife and when it came to the law. Let's say I don't want the system to screw me over. What options do I have? The guy smirked before I said another word. Write me a check for $500 because what I'm about to say implies that you and I never had this conversation and will never see each other again. I wrote out a check and gave it to him. First, let me ask you 2 questions. Do you like your job? Are there family members living nearby that you would miss? I answered, I hate my job and my parents and sister moved to Florida. The guy leaned back in his chair. Then I will continue, but this is not legal advice. This is me telling you what I would do in your situation. He paused for a second, perhaps searching for words. I would disappear. I would take everything I could from the accounts and get out of Dodge. Another thing is, if you had children. I would never recommend that a father abandon his children, especially with a cheating mother. But in your case, I say that the world is huge. Take the time to see it. This was the last thing I expected to hear, so I had to ask, why such a radical decision? Isn't it better to take the risk in court? You chose the wrong lawyer to answer this question. 4 years ago, I found my wife with a trainer. All this was filmed her and some pumped-up little rat in her bed. The recording showed them laughing at me, at the way I work, and they made an idiot out of me. Nasty, exploitative. I divorced her. I even had one of the best divorce lawyers in the area, better than me. 4 years later, I still pay her every month and will continue to do so for the next year. This is the reward you get for treating your wife like a queen and not forcing her to get a well-paying job while you're married. Let's face it, the system is rigged against people like you and me. I left the lawyer's office shaking my head but already beginning to formulate my plans. But first, I need to know exactly what Susan is doing at the neighbors' parties. A swinger party was planned for Saturday night, and if I was lucky, it would be at the Jacobs house. We'd been there often enough for barbecues and pool parties that I knew the layout of the house and knew I could settle in and spy on the festivities. Just in case, I installed a tracking app on Susan's phone. Saturday was a long day. I spent it sitting in my hotel room waiting for her phone to show that she was on her way. I didn't have to wait too long. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Susan left the house and went to the Jacobs. I drove to our neighborhood in my rental car and parked on the next block. The Jacobs have a small shed in their backyard, and I was able to get into it without anyone seeing me by climbing through a fence that was about 8 feet high. Over the next 2 hours, I used a hidden camera and a still camera to document the entire event at the Jacobs. The video was shot to record various combinations of couples, threesomes, and foursomes. I filmed all the fun going on by the pool or in the room outside the patio doors. A digital camera with a telephoto lens was used to capture details. The faces of the participants were clear enough to leave no doubt about their identity. The photographs showed the most disgusting acts I could imagine. The hardest part was watching and recording my wife. Yes, she was the main attraction and the obvious star of the show. The other women present may have had decent bodies, but Susan had the most beautiful, and most of the men took advantage of the situation. Sometimes there were several. It is impossible to understand true heartache until you see the woman you love, with whom you plan to have children and grow old together, having intimate moments with other men. I took a video of Susan at the Jacobs pool, having fun with Jake and Mark. The three of them ended up returning to the house. The patio doors were closed, but I could still see the lit room where Susan was sitting on some guy's lap, apparently giving him a lap dance. The next guy threw her on the couch, and they started having sex. After almost 2 hours of this, I had each participant's face recorded while they were in compromising positions. It was time to leave. When I was sitting in the car trying to calm down, I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I wanted to hurt Susan and all her friends, but I wouldn't do it. Instead, I returned to my hotel room, buying 5 bottles of whiskey along the way. I sat and thought about what to do next. I didn't get drunk. I sat up long after midnight and thought about my life and the options that the lawyer presented to me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that with the exception of my marriage to the woman I loved just a few hours ago, my life was crap. I hated my boss and my job. I hated life in the Midwest with all its cold winters. When the temperature finally rose above freezing, it was still impossible to go outside without being eaten alive by mosquitoes, and they now carried crazy pathogens like West Nile. I hated the big house that Susan just had to have before we had kids, with a big lawn that needed watering and fertilizer just to have to be mowed twice a week. There were very few neighbors I cared about, and that number had just been cut in half. It was now a given that I would leave Susan. I've heard that there are guys who can tolerate their wives' infidelity, and there are even guys who enjoy it. How, I don't know, but it definitely doesn't suit me. I tried to sleep. It was hard. But it finally happened after staring at the hotel room ceiling for what seemed like hours, wondering how I screwed up and why it happened this way. After I graduated from college with a double major in Spanish and French, the Army offered me a job. All I had to do was sign up for the next 4 years. The advantage of the Army over other options was that I would not be doing menial work for 2 or 3 years, but would be doing real work as a translator immediately after finishing basic training. I met Susan my senior year while I was stationed at the Pentagon. Susan worked as a waitress at the bar where my friends and I hung out. I won't lie, the main attraction was a pretty face, a sweet smile, and a killer body. We dated for 7 months before I popped the question. Susan said yes, and we got married and built a house in Charlotte 2 months after I got my leave. Susan had limited abilities. I hate to say it, but for all of Susan's wonderful qualities, intelligence was not one of them. I couldn't imagine how she would find another job at the bar. Hell, when we were dating, it was hard enough watching all the guys hit on her. Although it meant less money, Susan found a part-time job selling dresses. Money wasn't an issue because I was making good money enough to buy our dream house 4 years later, when prices had not yet fully recovered from the housing crash. Our main reasons for moving to Charlotte stumped me for 2 years after the move. My father was given good money for early retirement, and he and my mother decided to join the other snowbirds, sold their house, and moved to sunny Florida. My sister, who never appreciated the cold winters in Minnesota, followed them. I don't want to make excuses for Susan. There's no excuse for her going to the Jacobs parties, but I think when her mom and sister moved to Florida, it left a void in Susan's life, an emptiness that may have contributed to Susan's subsequent attachment to our new neighbors, especially Alice. After Susan and I bought the house, we gave ourselves a year to get it organized and ready before she got pregnant. Instead, I'm trying to sleep in this strange bed, wondering what I'll be doing in a year instead of holding my newborn baby. I woke up Sunday morning glad that I took my time last night with whiskey, and the hangover didn't make me feel any worse. There was a diner across the street that served a decent breakfast. I went through the list. I made a few things I wanted if I left and a list of our assets. Bank accounts, brokerage accounts, etc. The list of assets we needed to keep was short, and most of our money went toward a down payment on a house. I went to the first of 5 local car dealers looking for my next car. After finding what I wanted at 2 dealers, I made a deal with the one who gave me the best offer and drove off the dealer's lot with a used converted van and a check for $2,000, leaving my year-old Chrysler $300 behind. The dealer got the best deal, but I did everything right, and now I had a car in which I could travel. Tuesday and Wednesday were spent getting my finances in order and equipping my camper with everything I needed for a long trip. I was ready by Thursday, a full day before the deadline, and one of the days Susan was working at the store. Back at our house, I loaded the van with everything I wanted. There weren't many things, and they didn't fill the van more than necessary. I left a note on the kitchen table with 2 photographs, one of her with Jake and Mark, and the other of our wedding, torn in half. I thought about keeping my wedding ring, but figured I could sell it somewhere down the road. It was gold and must have cost at least a tank of gas. The note read, "Susan, I will not live with a liar and a cheat. Goodbye." My first stop was Naples, Florida, where my folks moved after my father retired. The van was a pleasure to drive. I spent 12 hours driving each day, mostly on country roads, before finding a campsite for the night. I quickly learned that there are good campsites and terrible ones. I'll have to learn to differentiate one from the other if I'm going to be traveling for any length of time. On the evening of the 3rd day, I came to my parents. My mom hugged me tightly, and even my dad hugged me like a man. They knew that I would come to visit, but did not know the details. It wouldn't be easy. They both loved Susan and were looking forward to the call that they were going to be grandparents. "What happened, Tom? Why are you here?" I didn't want to go into detail right away, not here, not on their porch. When we got inside, I had to ask, "Did Susan call and look for me?" Mom looked sadly into my eyes. "Why would she call and look for you? Doesn't she know you're here?" "She's probably too embarrassed to call and talk to either of you. I left Susan. I caught her cheating." Mom was shocked. "I can't believe it not, Susan." "Please believe me, Mom. I don't want to show you photographs for the sake of proof." She contacted our neighbors, a spouse exchange group. Finally, my father found his voice. "Why?" "The devil knows. I found out about this and decided to run away. I haven't talked to Susan and I don't plan to." "Are you getting a divorce?" "That's the point, Dad. I went to a lawyer and found out what a mess I would be in if we went to court for a divorce. I will pay her alimony for years, and during this time she will freely have fun with her neighbors. I chose the path of a coward. I quit my job, bought a van, and planned to move around for a while. That's not like you, son. Does not look like it, but maybe it's time for a change of heart. I graduated from college in 3 years and immediately went into the Army, where I spent 4 years. I came out, got a job within the first month, got married, and then spent the last 5 years trying to make it so I could raise kids with the love of my life. And here I am, 30 years old, no kids, no wife, a 4-year-old van, and about $6,000 to my name. Damn good deal, right?" Mom weighed everything. "Isn't there a way to forgive Susan and return to her?" "Well, that is if she apologizes and promises never to do that again." I felt sorry for my mother. She was always an optimist, always ready to forgive, always ready to think only good things about people. I hugged her. "No, Mom, you didn't see what I saw. She's not with just one guy. Didn't you hear her claim that she would miss me when she thought I was leaving on a business trip before arranging a meeting with neighbors and their friends? It was almost as bad as infidelity. Both destroyed my trust in her." At 7 o'clock, my sister Clara appeared at our parents' house. I was glad to see my little sister again. Even though she was 5 years younger than me, we were pretty close until I left home for college. When I came home for the holidays, we always found time to talk. But when I joined the Army, maintaining this closeness became more difficult. Until this evening, I didn't realize how much I missed her and how much she had matured. We walked along the beach. The sun had just set and the sky was bright red. When Mom and Dad weren't around, we could talk freely. "Susan called me last night. She said that you left and left only a note." "Did she tell you what the note said or why I left?" "No. She just asked that if I received news from you, I would ask you to call her so that she could explain everything." "Tell me, big brother, what happened?" "Susan got involved in the intimate entertainment of our neighbors. Without me, of course. I had to leave town on business. She took advantage of this to attend the party while I was away. I have videos of her with 5 different guys." I think Clara was taken aback by my revelation. "Not a damn thing! What did you hire a private detective?" "No, I didn't leave the city because I knew that something would happen. I saw a message on her phone. I stayed at a hotel nearby and filmed the party myself. They weren't too secretive. As soon as I had proof, I quit my job, bought a van, and left Charlotte. Now I'm going to travel for a while. It'll start with the States, and if there's money, maybe Europe." "What about Susan? Are you going to divorce her?" "As I already told Mom and Dad, divorce will mean I'll be paying her for years. It will not happen. I'll just leave it all behind." "Maybe you can take your little sister with you. I have a few weeks of vacation coming up, and I would like to spend them on the road with you as long as I don't bother you." Clara gave me a sly smile. "Clara, it's not about finding a replacement for Susan. It's about getting my head in order." "Understood. Anyway, if you're heading out west, I'd like to come with you for a couple of weeks. I heard Utah is very beautiful." "Agreed. We will do this in the fall when there will be fewer people, and it will not be so hot. Now, I need you to do me a big favor. I need your experience with computers." Clara was one of those rare women who didn't let misogynistic jerks stop her from becoming an expert programmer. "What do you need, big brother?" I told Clara about the videos and footage I had from Susan's intimate party and what I planned to do with them. As I laid out my revenge, Clara's smile grew until she couldn't help but laugh. "I agree, big brother. I can arrange this." It took several weeks to piece everything together and cover our tracks so that none of us could be traced. But 3 weeks after I left North Carolina, everything was ready. I knew Clara was good with computers, but what she was able to do blew me away. First, Clara and the guy she's dating, Danny, found the names and personal information of all the swingers and all but one of the couples who frequented the Jacobs parties. It took just 2 days to send phishing emails to all the participants' computers, which, when the recipient clicked on the link, downloaded a virus that gave Clara all the contacts of the targets, as we came to call these people, including email addresses. It was a gold mine. Jake Jacobs, who owned a local hardware store, became a prime target. Clara and Danny hacked into the store's work computer and downloaded the email and physical addresses of its customers. A website was created, hosted by a company from Ukraine specializing in amateur adult films. When I asked how we managed to do all this without being tracked, Clara and Danny just laughed, and then tried to explain that the web host was paid in Bitcoin, and all the routing went through so many iterations that it would be the CIA. I nodded my head as they explained it all, but it still didn't make any sense, so I decided to trust their experience. Mark Stevens was an enigma. We were unable to hack into his computer and were unable to discover much personal information. He was not on Facebook, LinkedIn, or other social networks. Jacob's computer didn't have his email address. We couldn't find where Mark worked, a complete mystery. Danny suggested that Mark was probably doing something illegal, and we eventually gave up trying to find anything about him. Clara and Danny had a friend who was a video editor, and he took the time to create an entertaining movie from the videos and photos. Each time the video showed a new intimate scene, the action was paused long enough to superimpose close-ups from the stills to identify the actors. The 45-minute video was uploaded to the site and ready. This next part will probably anger some people and make others shake their heads in disgust. When we edited the video, I didn't include the scene where Susan had intimate moments with Jake and Mark. We only kept the scene of Susan pleasing one of the other men, but only one scene enough to show her participation in the group's activities, but not so much as to cause her great embarrassment. More than one person has asked me why I didn't throw Susan's 5th place under the bus and expose her depravity, and I only have one answer. Susan's parents, Robert and Linda Hamilton, are 2 of the sweetest and nicest people I have ever known. They accepted me into their home, treated me like a son, and if they ever have to see or hear about our video, they deserve better than to see their daughter in that light. Even if she herself doesn't deserve more for breaking my heart. So, while the video proved Susan was a participant, it didn't include any of her worst moments. One sunny Florida morning, Clara came to our parents' house where I was staying, sat down at the kitchen table with her ever-present cup of black coffee, and asked the question. "Everything is ready, big brother. The site is up, the email is loaded, a couple of 100 letters to Jacob's customers who don't have email are stamped and ready to send. Are you ready to pull the plug? It's time to act. Yes, Clara, it's time. Let's get started and have some fun." Clara took out her phone and said, "Danny, send emails." Clara looked up at me. "One of our friends is going to Vegas today. Hell put the letters in the mailbox when he lands, so no one can track their return here. I think we covered our tracks as best we could." "Thank you, Clara. Thanks for everything. Tomorrow I fly out and begin my travels." Clara handed me a credit card. Danny suggested something else. It was his idea for me to get a credit card in my name for those times when you need to pay for something and cannot use cash. He said many state and national campgrounds require reservations and require a credit card. It's in my name, but if you put the reservation in my name and I don't complain to the bank's fraud department about the charges, it won't matter. This way, no one can track you using your card. This one has a $5,000 line of credit. You can pay me when it's convenient for you. I hugged Clara. It was almost too much to expect. "Thank you. Thanks to Danny, too." "Well, don't forget that you promised that we would soon spend some time traveling together. Like I said, it's too hot and too crowded in Utah's national parks right now. Let's plan to meet at the end of September and visit one of these parks." Having agreed to spend 2 weeks in September, Clara went to work. I got out and prepared the van for the trip. The next morning, I kissed my mom goodbye and gave my dad a manly hug, thanked them for letting me stay for a while, promised to stay safe and stay in touch. Then my father surprised me by leaning into the open passenger door window of the van. "I love you, son. I always knew he loved me. He showed it to me in 1,000 ways growing up, but he never said it before. My eyes watered as I backed up. I took the scenic roads north to Virginia on the Blue Ridge Parkway and spent a week traveling southwest to North Carolina. Went north to Nashville, where I spent 2 days on Broadway listening to great music. Visited Shiloh National Monument. I've always wanted to see it since I did a report on Western Civil War battles back in high school. I headed west with a plan to stop in Memphis to spend time on Beale Street and maybe visit Graceland. It was late at night and I was sleeping in a van parked on the side of State Route 64 east of Bolivar, Tennessee, when I was awakened by a knock on the door. It was a state patrol officer standing there with one hand on the butt of his service pistol. The holster was unfastened. "How can I help you, officer?" "How long have you been parked here?" "I arrived last night around 10. I was too tired to drive any further, so I decided to sleep for a few hours." "Can I see your driver's license, please?" I handed him my license, and he went back to his patrol car to make the call. I sat in the passenger seat and waited for him to return. When he returned, I was worried. There was something in the way he looked at me. He still had his hand on the gun. "Mr. Thompson, did you know that there was a warrant out for your arrest?" "No, I didn't know. And it says what I allegedly did?" "I don't know the details. It's a misdemeanor arrest warrant. Is there a reason someone is looking for you in North Carolina?" I told the officer my version of what happened. Then he added, "I guess some judge awarded my wife alimony, but I didn't pay it." The officer smiled. "Well, I have to bring you in, but now I need to chase that car over there that just drove past at speed. I think it's a drunk driver, and that takes precedence over your warrant. You can stay here and wait for me to return, or since it's 30 minutes from the state line, you can drive south on Highway 18 and get out of my jurisdiction. Do you understand what I'm talking about?" I didn't see any cars driving by, so I figured the guy was giving me a break. Perhaps he had his own story of heartbreak and nodded. "Yes, officer. You don't want this to come back to me, do you?" "Officer, you can ask anyone, even my future ex-wife. I would rather cut off my left hand than let down someone who has done me a good deed." "I bet you're right-handed, right? Okay, I'll cut off my right hand if you ever hear that I've let you down." With this, he went west, and I went south to Mississippi. Given that I missed Beale Street, the siren song of New Orleans and its Bourbon Street was calling to me, and I continued south. 3 days of drinking and listening to jazz, Zydeco, and Creole music had put a hole in my wallet. I took off my gold wedding ring, bought a tank of gas, 2 bottles of Dixie, and a huge bowl of jambalaya, then headed west out of town. I needed to avoid big cities and the associated expenses until my funds ran out. I still had a few thousand left, but I was spending it too quickly. Along the way, I talked to several other vagabonds and learned from them how to limit the expenses associated with my new lifestyle. I learned how cheap it is to dry camp on BLM lands. One of the couples I met on the road suggested that I go to Big Bend National Park. They said this place was like heaven. What the hell, I have nowhere to go, and no one is waiting for me to get there. I went to Big Bend. I was sitting at the bar at the Starlight Theater Steakhouse in Terlingua, just outside the park boundary, listening to a group of Aussies at the next table calling each other names. I was probably watching them too closely, trying to catch some meaning in the dialect, when the largest of this group, a mountain of a man standing 2 meters tall and weighing at least 120 kilograms, stood up from the table and loomed over me. "It's rude to eavesdrop on conversations, buddy." I must have been in the mood because my answer might have gotten me a punch to the nose. "I wouldn't call it eavesdropping because I can't understand half of what you all say." "And even with a funny accent?" The mountain man was amazed. "Well, you are an impudent one, Yankee. What makes you think that it's our accent that's funny and not your own?" "Well, you're sitting in a Texas bar, so your accent is strange. If we were sitting in a bar in Brisbane, then yes, it would be mine. And considering that you are a guest in my country, let me treat you to a beer." Any hostility was negated by my reluctance to be intimidated, and mainly by my offer to buy him a beer. The mountain man extended his hand. My name is Jack. The beer is Foster's, and you are invited to join our table. My name is Tom, and I accept the invitation. I hadn't spent time socially since Florida, and despite the fact that I only understood half of what was said, unless the speaker was kind enough to explain in English what he or she meant, I had the best time in months. These people knew how to drink and have a good time. Even the ladies tried to outdrink me. There were 8 of them. They traveled together and spent 4 weeks in the United States, starting in Dallas. Eventually, they invited me to join their caravan. It turned out that they were divided into pairs. One of the couples, James and Sarah, is married. The rest have a friends with benefits arrangement. Even though I was the odd one out, I decided this was too good an opportunity to pass up and spent the next 2 weeks with them. After leaving Texas, our caravan traveled to Roswell, New Mexico. The Australians were eager to see the place where all the UFO hysteria began. It was pretty uneventful, but at least now we could all say we'd been there and cross it off our respective bucket lists. The White Sands Monument was interesting, although the men wanted to continue west to Tombstone. The ladies voted against it. It'll just be another tourist trap, they said. So we headed north to Colorado instead. I stayed out of the discussion and was happy to be anywhere with this happy group. The Colorado Rockies blew my mind. I was not ready for such beauty. I grew up in the Midwest and spent all my time east of the Rockies. The Aussies and I spent our last week together zigzagging across the state before splitting up at Breckenridge. They were returning to Texas, and I was heading to Grand Junction where Clara would meet me. We spent the last night in a bar walking down Main Street before I said goodnight to them, promising that I would make it to Australia someday. As I walked back to my van, Mary came up behind me and took my hand. "Can I stay with you for the night?" I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, but didn't want to start a fight with my new friends and never wanted to be that guy who gets involved with someone else's woman. "What about Jack? Will he be upset if you spend the night with me?" Jack had his eye on that American blonde with fake breasts, and apparently he will spend the night with her. Jack and I travel well together and have a lot of fun, but we're not what you'd call exclusive. Mary's offer was tempting. I've never had a one-night stand before. I guess I'm an old-fashioned guy who likes to have a relationship when I sleep with a girl. "Does this mean you don't want to sleep with me?" I looked at Mary, determined to end the long silence. "No, damn it, come with me." I put my hand on Mary's waist and led her into the van. We drove back to the campsite while Mary fed my ego by saying that she had been hoping for this opportunity since we met, and that other girls would turn green with envy. "We all think you're a cute and special guy." Within minutes of parking the van in the lot, we were without clothes and playing with each other's bodies. It had been a few months since my last time with Susan. I decided to take the time to reacquaint myself with the female anatomy, and Mary seemed to appreciate my efforts. Damn, it felt good physically and emotionally to be inside a woman and feel her legs wrap around my waist. When we finished, I realized that I hadn't thought about protection. "Sorry, I didn't think—" Mary stroked my cheek, smiling. "No, I wanted it myself. I am safe, both in terms of health and in terms of pregnancy. No worries." I kissed her soft lips. Here was a girl with a great libido, natural beauty, confidence, and a sense of humor. I was both sad and happy that she was leaving tomorrow. I could easily fall in love with her, although I knew that I was not ready for another relationship. We continued kissing until Mary told me it was time for bed. When I woke up the next morning, Mary was already up and dressed. She was sitting on the bed holding my hand. Seeing that I opened my eyes, she leaned over and kissed me. "Goodbye, Tom. Don't let what this woman did to you affect how you treat the next one. There are many good, faithful women in the world. You are a wonderful person, and you will find one of them." I couldn't help myself. "Is there any chance that it could be you?" "No, I'm afraid we wouldn't work well together. I would be too far from my family and you from yours. I've listened to you over the past 2 weeks. You are close to your sister and parents. I couldn't take you away from them, and no grandmother wants to be halfway around the world from her grandchildren." Mary was right, of course. Thank God, the first woman I had an intimate moment with since Susan was smarter and more practical than me. Well, I had to ask, thank you for last night. You will never know how much it meant to me. I think I know. It meant a lot to me, too. Take care, Tom. Have a fun trip with your sister. Mary kissed me on the lips and left the van. That morning, all the other Australians came to my station before setting off. It was especially nice to receive a strong handshake and hug from Jack. His smile was as wide as it could be as he reminded me of my promise to come someday. On the way to Grand Junction, I felt good. On the rear-view mirror hung the necklace that Mary had left there that morning. There was a note in the ashtray. This is for Clara. Please tell your sister that I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to meet and that her brother is a gentleman and a great guy. With love, Mary. The necklace was an inexpensive shell necklace that Mary always wore, and the note meant the world to me. Clara and I were walking through Arches National Park, heading toward Delicate Arch when we crossed paths with another tourist, Abby Ross. She went camping alone. Her height was about 1.7 meters, and her body was like that of an athlete. She had long black hair, naturally shiny, to complement her dark skin and very dark eyes. She walked past Clara and me on the trail. We exchanged a quick hello, and after we passed, Clara caught me staring at her perfect figure and elbowed me in the ribs. What? I tried to play dumb. Clara just smiled at my attempt. You men are all the same. Just because a woman has the body of a goddess, you can't help but turn to jelly. And you want to say that women are somehow different? I saw you practically drooling over that tall guy when we were standing at the airport carousel waiting for your luggage. Damn, I almost took a picture of you to send to Danny so he could see how you act when he's not around. God, do not dare. I admit I looked, but I would never touch. I've been completely faithful to Danny since we've been together. So is everything serious with him? As serious as a heart attack. I think he's going to propose when I get back to Florida. He wanted to join us on this trip but couldn't make it. I was happy for my sister. She deserved a guy as wonderful as Danny. When we got to the top, I was happy to find a female tourist sitting there taking pictures of the arch. Clara did me a big favor by walking up and introducing herself while I walked back 6 meters or so and opened my backpack to prepare lunch. The exchange between the two women was friendly. By the time I got everything ready, Clara came over and introduced us. Abby, this is my brother Tom. Tom, this is Abby Ross. I asked her to join us for lunch and finally persuaded her. We ate, told stories, and when it was time to go down, we hiked together. When Clara found out Abby didn't have a campsite for the night, she invited Abby to share her campsite at Devil's Garden. Abby protested but was unable to convince Clara. The three of us shared an evening meal and a wonderful night under the stars, sitting around the fire. Thus began my friendship with Abby Ross from Klamath Falls, Oregon. Abby went hiking with us in Arches and Canyonlands National Parks. Then she agreed to accompany us when we went to Goblin Valley State Park. Abby worked as a waitress in Klamath Falls and had recently graduated from the local community college. We eventually found out that she was on the trip alone because her long-term boyfriend had left her for another girl 3 weeks before they were supposed to go on the trip. Abby decided to go alone but was happy to join Clara and me. I didn't realize how lonely I would be without him. Thank you both for allowing me to go with you. After Goblin, Abby had to go home, and we promised each other to stay in touch. I still had a week to spend with Clara. We said goodbye to Abby and headed to Bryce Canyon in the van. Clara began her investigation. Well, what do you think, big brother? Quite a nice lady, isn't she? Very sweet, I agreed, but I didn't feel any romantic vibes from her. So what are you getting at? I want to say this. She is still suffering from a recent breakup, but I have noticed more than once how she looked at you more than friendly. Give her time, and she will be ready for romance. For the next week, we said nothing more about our new friend, but when I dropped Clara off at the airport, she started talking about it. Call her, Tom. Maybe go to Klamath Falls and spend a couple of days with her without me. I'll bet you $100 that she'll say yes if you ask if you can come there. Good. Just so you stop stalking me, I'll call her. Say hi to Mom and Dad and Danny for me. Call when you land. I returned to my van and took out the map. 1,000 miles if you take the scenic route. The best thing is that about most of the route was along US 50 through Nevada, the loneliest highway in America. How appropriate. I was in no rush and didn't mind being alone, especially after spending 2 weeks with the Australians and the next 2 with Clara. This gave me time to think. By the time I got to Reno, I had made my decision and called Abby. She was glad I called and didn't hesitate when I asked if she wanted to join me. Abby had to work the next 2 days and then have 3 days off, so I took my time and arrived on the morning of her first day off. Abby and I spent the 3 days hiking and exploring southwestern Oregon, from Crater Lake to Ashland, where we watched Shakespeare's As You Like It, in a replica of the Globe Theatre. It was a wonderful 3 days, and although the van was a bit cramped, nothing romantic happened other than us holding hands. I would have loved to have done more, but it was very clear that Abby wasn't ready for that kind of relationship. Still, it was fun, and when I dropped her off on Thursday, I promised to stop by Klamath Falls on my way back from my next stop, Glacier National Park. I needed to get there quickly. It was the end of October, and winter would soon come, especially at high altitudes. It was while in Glacier that I received an answer to one of my inquiries regarding further employment. I contacted one of my former commanders, and she responded with an offer to provide translation services as a contractor. The best part was that the appointment was at the embassy in Paris. I had 3 weeks to catch a plane to Paris. I left Glacier that afternoon, spent 2 days with Abby. She was able to swap shifts with 2 other servers, and we spent the 2 days getting to know each other better. In the end, we kissed and hugged, but nothing more. It is always dangerous to step down the slippery slope of comparing one woman to another. Susan could lie in bed for hours on weekends. She drank a second cup of coffee and finished reading one of her magazines halfway through without even thinking about getting up. By the time she got out of bed, I had already finished my breakfast and was doing my morning chores. Abby couldn't wait to get up and attack the day. By 10 o'clock, we were 8 miles down the trail or halfway to the mountaintop. Another important difference was what each woman read. I've never seen Susan with a book in her hands. Abby didn't just read books, she read literature. She was the first woman I met who had already read the brothers Karamazov, Anna Karenina, and War and Peace. The more time I spent with Abby, the more I realized that she and I have similar views on almost everything that I consider important. And perhaps just as important for a long-term relationship, I was completely captivated by her physical beauty. I hoped that her ex-boyfriend wouldn't realize his mistake and try to rekindle their romance while I was abroad. I fell in love with Abby and told her so, but I'll be gone for the next year, and I haven't been able to properly explain the nature of our relationship. Stupid me like that. We nevertheless agreed that she would visit me in Paris. I drove straight to Naples, stopping at rest stations along the way to get my usual 6 hours of sleep. Sticking to the highway, I was able to reach my parents' house 4 days later, exhausted but happy. I had no problems obtaining the necessary documents and visas, which meant that something had changed in North Carolina. The charges against me were dropped. I was no longer a fugitive. 10 days after arriving in Florida, I kissed my parents and sister goodbye and boarded a plane to Paris. In Paris, I met Simone Perrault. She was 25 years old and different from all the girls and women I had known up to that moment. My parents would call her bohemian. When we first got into bed, I felt like a pervert. She was tiny, almost boyish, with her French slender body and A-cup breasts. But as soon as she pulled me into her bed, all thoughts of her being anything other than a woman went out the window. This woman knew how to have good, intimate moments. Simone used my body like a gymnast uses an apparatus, and she could bend and unbend her body in positions that seemed impossible. Every time I thought we had reached our limit, she would introduce me to a new position. When we weren't making love, we hung out in cafes with her other bohemian friends, smoking Gauloises and drinking absinthe. We read and argued about Camus, Baudelaire, and Sartre. The more I read about Sartre apologies for Stalin's abuses in the Soviet Union, the less I liked him and the more I idolized Camus. Simone and I often argued about this and always had wonderful make-up intimate moments afterward. It was almost worth arguing. It was all a lot of fun. I felt like Ernest Hemingway at the beginning of the 20th century. I never thought about falling in love with Simone. She was too different in her politics and values. We fooled around together for 4 months until she left Paris with another couple for the Mediterranean town of Cap d'Agde. I missed the intimate moments, but not the philosophical debates, which could get boring. It might have been a good time for us to break up, because I had been putting off visiting Abby for the past month. I made good money and knew plane travel would be difficult for a waitress, so I sent Abby plane tickets. She was supposed to come for 2 weeks in mid-May. Contrary to the song, May is much nicer than April. I must say that I was not prepared for my reaction when I picked up Abby at the airport. I watched her walk toward me, and all my feelings of love for her swelled inside me. She lowered her travel bag to hug and kiss me. She held my head in her hands, not allowing the kiss to end until she realized that we were in a public place, but it was a very French moment. I took Abby to my apartment and told her to take a nap. She was on an overnight flight from O'Hare. That evening, we were going to celebrate her arrival. I went to work for several hours, and when I returned to the apartment, I was pleasantly surprised. Abby had clearly spent some time shopping for city clothes. I never saw her in anything other than outdoor attire. Here she was, dressed in the most matching skirt and sweater with a stylish leather jacket and high heels. She saw the expression on my face. Like it? It's fantastic. Let me clean myself up and change into something suitable to accompany such a beautiful lady. It was a wonderful first night. Paris seemed to have taken Abby into its heart. Best of all, that night Abby and I made love for the first time. Over the next 5 days, I showed Abby all the usual sights of Paris, the Louvre and Musée d'Orsay, Notre Dame, the Shakespeare and Company bookstore, and the top of the Eiffel Tower, at least 8 attractions on Abby's must-see list. On the 6th day, we boarded the high-speed train and spent 3.5 hours traveling to Chamonix. When I told Abby about my plans, she protested that she didn't bring decent hiking boots or clothes. Then she protested when I took her to an outdoor store to get everything she needed. She continued to protest until I convinced her that it was a late Christmas and early birthday present. Although there was still snow on the higher ground, we walked where we could along the alpine trails. 3 days later, we headed back to Paris and continued checking off Abby's list of things to do in Paris. Everything was going great until the last evening when we stopped at a small café for a nightcap before heading back to my apartment. Everything fell apart there. Simone's group of friends, people who knew Simone and I were together, saw Abby and me and insisted that we join them. At some point, Abby and I became separated. She was talking to 2 women. I was having a discussion with men. When it was time to leave, I saw it in Abby's eyes. When were you going to tell me about Simone? I didn't intend to. It was a short affair with a woman before you and I became intimate. Now that you and I are lovers, I'm more than ready to commit to being with you exclusively. I promise that I will never be with another woman while we have such obligations. Abby didn't calm down. I thought we were lovers when you left Klamath Falls last November. You told me you loved me. I thought it meant something. I said I was falling in love with you, and that actually meant something. We had to define what that meant. Abby started crying. What a fool I am. She went to the bedroom and got ready for her flight, another one at night. She left the bedroom with tears in her eyes. I'll take a taxi to the airport. Let me take you. No, now I just need to be alone. I'm sorry this happened. Last night I had such a good time with you, and now I feel like I'm just a placeholder until Simone returns to Paris. It's not true. Maybe not, but it seems so to me, and I need to think it over. Call and well talk. We may not be able to talk for a long time. Tomorrow I'm leaving for Moscow for important negotiations. While I'm there, communication will be limited due to the nature of these negotiations. Let me take you to the airport. No, just call me when you can. Abby reached behind my head and pulled me in for a kiss. I love you, Tom Thompson. She left without saying another word, but before the door closed, I said to her, and I love you, Abby Ross. I was right. For the next 2 weeks in Moscow, communication was short and limited to family members. By the time I returned to Paris, my first phone conversation with Abby was tense. Before we had time to improve relations, I went to Moscow again because the agreements reached during the first round of negotiations were falling apart. Talk about bad timing. Abby was understanding but distant. She did her best to tell me she understood, but we needed to talk, and quickly, before everything fell apart. In July, Clara, Danny, Mom, and Dad came to visit. One of the great advantages of serving in Paris was that it did not take much effort to persuade people to come stay for a while. I tried the same thing at some of my previous military postings. Clara had great news. Susan called her to explain why I was no longer a fugitive. Susan was renting out our old house to a couple who wanted to buy it. Selling the house would be enough to pay off the mortgage, plus any remaining money owed to Susan if I had signed the papers giving up my claim on the house. Susan would have enough. Most importantly, Susan filed for divorce, claiming abandonment. We would be officially divorced by June of next year without any additional effort on my part. Clara had the documents. I signed them and mailed them to Susan. We had a great time in Paris. The only exception was when Clara gave me a hard time for letting Abby go. "Clara, I'm not just trying. I'll work it out when I get back to the States, I promise." "Damn, what a fool you are, big brother. Do you really think that a woman with such virtues, beauty, personality, and brains will sit for a long time and yearn for your pathetic 5th place?" She was right. But for the next few months, there was little I could do except Skype with Abby and write love letters. My first stop upon returning to the States was Klamath Falls. Not only did Abby welcome me with open arms, but she also did everything to make me feel like we were a couple again. But there was one big problem. I needed a job, and the only West Coast offer I got was from a tech company in Los Angeles. Family was very important to Abby, and she wanted to stay close to her family, while I needed to be where there were opportunities for my specialty. And Klamath Falls is not a place where those skills are needed. Finally, we were both on the same continent, but we lived 700 miles apart. For the next few months, we spent at least one weekend a month together, either in Klamath Falls or Los Angeles. In May, we took 2 weeks off from work to hike Joshua Tree, Kings Canyon, and Death Valley. There was not the slightest doubt that we were suitable for each other and loved each other, but I still found it difficult to decide on marriage. This was most likely due to my lack of self-confidence and other trust issues. Let's face it, my history with women has not inspired confidence. Susan didn't leave me, but I wasn't enough for her to remain faithful. Simone, although we were not suitable for each other, still left me, not the other way around. Abby claims she loves me, but not enough to leave her family and join me in California. Abby and I continued to meet whenever possible. I was 100% faithful and had no doubt that she was too. I didn't give up. I kept looking for a way for us to be together. Sometimes life throws you curveballs. Sometimes it throws you over the head. And every now and then you get a serve that's just big and fat going straight to your sweet spot. You can't help but knock it out of the park. That July, I received 2 fat balls. First, a New York publishing house contacted me and offered me the job of a lifetime. I was chosen to translate Joseph Stalin's personal papers and letters from Russian into English for an upcoming book. Previously, these documents were translated by Russians, but the publisher realized that much had been erased. I had to do the second translation without bias. The work would take quite a lot of time, and the best part is that I could do it from anywhere, even from Klamath Falls. Then, less than a week after signing a contract with the publishing house, the incredible happened. 2 years and 2 months after I moved out of my home in North Carolina, I woke up to someone knocking on my door. I put on my sweatpants and walked to the door, opening it and wondering who could be so rude as to wake me up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Susan was standing there. "Hi, Tom." This was not the greeting I expected after all this time. I looked down at Susan's hands to see if she had a weapon, but all she was holding was a manila envelope. "Can I come in, Tom?" I stepped aside and let Susan into the room. Coffee would be nice. I left the hotel this morning without breakfast. I decided to be kind. Time softens a broken heart. I'll make scrambled eggs. I didn't come for breakfast, Tom. I came to deliver this. Susan held out the envelope. Our divorce was finalized 2 months ago. I thought you should know. I indicated abandonment of the child as the reason. I quickly looked through the papers. You could have mailed them. I have nothing to sign here. Susan began to lose her composure. Her voice became louder. I wanted to give them to you personally. I didn't want to be such a coward like you. I wanted to look into your eyes, and I wanted you to know how much I hate you for leaving me like that, without a word, just with a note. And I wanted a wife who doesn't spread her legs for a bunch of... Susan collapsed on the sofa, sobbing, but that didn't stop me from continuing. You have no idea how my heart broke when I saw you with Jake and the other clowns. Susan had the decency to apologize between sobs. I'm sorry. Me too. I thought we loved each other and were ready to have children. I was ready to start having our children, and then that Alice started coming to our house for coffee. She filled my head with all sorts of crap. She said that when you finally understand what you're missing, you'll join their group. This should never have happened. I was actually serious that day when we exchanged our vows, forsake all others, and I really meant it all those times when I said that for me, you are the only woman. Susan lowered her head, looking at the floor. My curiosity got the better of me, and I asked, what happened after I left? Did you stay with the group? No, I never did that again. After I got home and found your note, I probably talked to Alice no more than 2 or 3 times, and then only when I couldn't avoid her. Besides, your little bomb blew everything up. Susan noticed the look in my eyes when she said, your little bomb. Oh, Tom, don't pretend you weren't the one who posted the videos and photos or sent anonymous letters to half of Charlotte. Everyone suspected it was you, but no one had proof. Have you had it? I didn't think about it at the time. I realized later that I left a picture of you, Jake, and Mark on the dining room table. If anyone saw the photo, they would have proof that I was behind the site. I burned the photograph 10 minutes after I saw it. I was sick of having documentation of my depraved behavior in our home. And even if I had not destroyed it, I would never have shared it with others. I couldn't betray you a second time. So, what happened? First, Jake Jacobs lost his hardware store. His contract with Deere included a community standards clause. Who would have thought progressive Midwesterners would be so outraged by Jacobs parties? When people stopped buying from the store, Deere pulled out, leaving Jake to sell cheap Chinese tractors and other crap. The store went bankrupt. Jake was deeply in debt, and Alice left him for Mark. No way. I was pleased with this turn of events, but Susan wasn't finished yet. Jake blew his brains out, put the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger, and Alice ended up living happily ever after with Jake's best friend. Susan shook her head. No, it turned out that Mark had anger problems, and after putting Alice in the hospital, he ended up in prison and will be there for at least 8 years. 8 years for hitting a woman? What did he do to her? Oh, there was more than that. When the police went to his home, they found him distributing oxycodone. He received a year for beating Alice and 10 for pill distribution charges. It just kept getting better and better. I couldn't stop laughing, Susan continued. 2 other couples have moved. It seems the school board doesn't have much sympathy for elementary school teachers involved in an intimate scandal. What about you, Susan? Well, except for the fact that I completely ruined my personal life by pushing away the man I loved, my professional life turned out well. No one thought about the personal life of a clothing salesperson. I cut my hair and dyed it, and most people didn't even realize it was me in those videos. But some people figured it out, and from time to time I had to deal with the consequences. I worked full-time and attended community college classes in the evenings. I received my AA degree and now manage a Banana Republic store in St. Louis Park. Well done. And I spoke seriously as I said, time has softened me. Susan started crying. Do you see us ever getting back together, Tom? I may have gotten softer, but my brain hasn't turned to cheese. No, I'm sorry, Susan, but that won't happen. All trust is gone. What ruined it was seeing you with those guys. And you know as well as I do that a marriage without trust is not a happy marriage. I knew you would say that, Tom, but I just had to ask. As soon as I saw your face and heard your voice, I remembered what I had given up, so I had to try again. Forgive me, Tom. At these words, Susan began to sob. Damn, I once loved this woman with all my heart. That evening we had dinner with Susan. During dinner, I just had to ask, why, Susan? I thought we had a good marriage. Why did you let Alice talk you into doing this? Tom, I've always been such a good girl. I've never done anything even slightly wild. You were the second man in my life. Alice played on my naivety, convinced that it was only a matter of time before you joined in the fun. She said that no red-blooded man could resist the opportunity to have intimate moments with multiple women. She spoke as if there was something wrong with your libido for resisting, that you were the pervert, not us. This should never have happened, Susan. The vow to forsake all others meant everything to me. Susan nodded as if agreeing with me before finishing her explanation. Alice gave me the book because Hes Watching by Kristen Malin. It was about a married couple and how the husband gets aroused by watching his wife have intimate moments with other men. She also told me how to find such sites on the internet. The more time I spent reading and watching, the easier it was for Alice and Jake to convince me to give it a try. At the first party, I was the center of attention, the prom queen, and it fed my ego. It wasn't that hard for them to get me to go to the second party where you caught me. I drove Susan back to her hotel. I saw that she was waiting for me to ask if I could stay the night, but I stood firm. Yes, I could have slept with her and left, but that would have been wrong for many reasons, not least of which was my commitment to Abby. The next morning, I woke up and looked at the clock. It was only 7, and Susan's plane wouldn't leave until 11. I had plenty of time to pick her up and take her to LAX for her flight, another chance to spend a few hours with the woman I've wanted to love my whole life. Instead, I sat down and drank a cup of coffee. Something haunted me, something that woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and kept me awake for 2 hours. Now everything made sense. My last evening with Susan was like a cleansing of all the bile that had accumulated in my head and heart. My soul had been cleansed. I didn't realize until last night how important it was to close this chapter of my life with Susan in order to start a new chapter with someone else, with Abby. I showered, packed the car, and locked the apartment. With any luck, I'll make it 700 miles and be in Klamath Falls before Abby finishes her shift tonight. I called, hoping it wasn't too early to call someone who worked the late shift. She must have seen my name on the screen. Her voice sounded sleepy. Hi, Tom. Good morning, Abby. Sorry to wake you, but I was wondering if I could pick you up from work tonight. Why? Where are you? I'm just leaving Thousand Oaks. I must be with you by 11. Something happened. No, I just need to stay with you for a couple of days. If you can give me some time, maybe we could take a little hike and talk. Certainly. I'll switch shifts with Janet tomorrow. Are you sure you should drive all day? I'll be fine. I'll see you at 11. I was 200 miles north when I realized that I was going to propose empty-handed. I stopped at Ben's Bridge in Sacramento. I was looking at diamond rings when my gaze moved to a display case with sapphires next to diamonds. One ring caught my eye, and I walked up to it, much to the surprise of the saleswoman. Sapphire? Yes, this one. An unconventional ring for an unconventional lady. It's perfect. Please put it in a box, no need to wrap it. The saleswoman smiled. She'll like it. What about the size? Let's hope she says yes, then we won't worry about the size. She placed the ring in a beautiful blue box and swiped the card on my credit card. Thank you, good luck, but I can tell she'd be a fool to say no. I got back on I-5 and headed north. While I was driving, I called Clara and turned on the speakerphone so as not to get a ticket. Today is the day, sister. Today I go to Abby with a ring in my pocket and all the hope in the world in my heart. Clara was practically screaming down the phone. I'm glad for you, Tom. Do you think she will say yes? Clara laughed. Ask her the right way and she will be your bride by the time you get to the do you agree part. I wish I had your confidence. Wish me luck, sis. Clara was almost right. I pulled up to the front door of the pub at 11:15, and Abby walked out to the car. I opened the door, got down on one knee with the box in my hands, but before I could say, "I agree," she was already in my arms and said, "Yes," kissing me on the lips, cheeks, nose, and forehead. "Looks like I'm getting married again." We spent the next 2 days visiting her family, walking in the mountains and making love. Abby was especially excited when she heard about my new contract. "Seriously, Tom? Will I marry you and live here?" That's when I realized that Abby had said yes to my marriage proposal without asking about our living arrangements. Now, with my new contract, this was a moot point. We will be able to live and raise our children, and she will have the support of her mother and father, the best of all worlds. 2 days later, I was on the road again. It was time to return to Los Angeles and tell the boss the bad news. When I returned home, there was a note on my door. "Tom, this morning I had a little time before leaving, and I decided to come to you to once again ask for forgiveness for betraying your trust in me. I don't know if we'll ever have the opportunity to see or talk to each other again, but please understand that I know it was my immature, selfish behavior to listen to Jake and Alice's bad advice. It's the only reason why today we are not husband and wife, and why I will never have our children, the children we planned and worked for. I will love and miss you always. Also, I understand that you spared me pain with the video. I know that you had to capture me with those other men and in situations that I will be forever ashamed of. I think you did it to spare my parents and perhaps spare me. Whatever the reason, I will always be grateful to you for showing me such mercy. You are a good person, Susan." That was the last time I ever heard from Susan. It was October, a wonderful time in the Northwest. Abby and I had a small wedding in Klamath Falls. Mom, Dad, Clara, and Danny came to the wedding. 2 of my friends from the Army also came. This was the Thompson contingent. On Abby's side, friends from school, college, family, and work colleagues walked down the aisle. We had an open bar, snacks, a live band, and a dance floor. It was a lot of fun. Abby and I stayed until the last guest left. Our honeymoon was something completely unusual for us. Instead of spending a week hiking in the woods or in the desert, we booked a whole week on the beach in the Virgin Islands. Of course, Abby got up every morning to run a few miles on the beach and then swim a couple more miles in the ocean. But every morning after returning to our cabin and showering, she would drag me back to bed to renew our wedding vows. Translating Stalin's documents earned me the reputation of being the best translator of Russian literature into English. This way, I was able to earn a good living to support my growing family and work from home. Sometimes I had to travel on business trips to meet with authors or publishers, but this was no more than 3 or 4 weeks a year. A year after the birth of our first son, George Adam, or G.A., Abby's mother died of cancer. She left quickly, too quickly for Abby, but at least she lived to meet her grandson and did not suffer from cancer for long. It seemed like Abby's mom was the glue that held the family together, because over the next year, Abby's brother and sister-in-law moved to Tucson to be closer to her family. Abby's father said he was tired of the cold and moved to Baja, Mexico, near Ensenada. Suddenly, our family had no reason to stay in Oregon. Abby brought this up. "I think it would be nice to live closer to your family and Clara. They could have spent more time with G.A. We sold our house in Klamath Falls and moved to Naples. 9 months later, Clara Abigail was born. Mom and Dad couldn't be happier. Me too. Thank you for tuning into this shocking tale of betrayal and redemption. What would you have done in Tom's situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our dramatic stories. See you in the next video.